Hello and welcome back. We're going to, in this video, go over another technique we can use in genetics to track how certain genes travel. And in this case, we're going to use what's known as a pedigree, okay? In the previous videos, we used the Punnett squares to predict what the offspring of certain parents would be. With pedigrees, pedigrees allow us kind of to track how a disease or how something moves through a family, but it also tells us a little something about the disease as well, okay? Now with pedigrees, we're going to have some standard nomenclature that goes along with it. Anytime you see a circle in a pedigree, that's going to represent a female, all right? Gentlemen, I hate to break it to you, but you're square, all right? So squares and pedigrees are going to be males, all right? If you're into tracking things through ancestry and you go back, and we're talking you need to go back many, many generations, like into the 1900s, 1800s, you may see another symbol as well, and that's a diamond. And in that case, the gender of that particular individual would be unknown. Now in most of today's pedigrees, modern pedigrees, that's not going to be a symbol that you're going to see a lot of, okay? There are going to be some other annotations that you're going to see, okay? If you see either a circle or a square with a hash through it, that means that person is no longer living, okay? So they're deceased, all right? There's something else we'll see in pedigrees that's going to be different. I'm going to draw it right underneath here so that you can see the difference. If you see either or a female or a male symbol colored in halfway, okay, what that indicates is the person is a carrier for the particular trait that you're following, okay? Someone who's a carrier typically is going to be heterozygous for that particular trait, okay? So we've got male, female, unknown, deceased, carrier, and then the other thing you'll see in pedigrees, all right? So the ones above were only half colored in. If you see a circle or a square that is completely colored in, all right? That's an affected individual, all right? Which means they have whatever trait it is you happen to be tracking, okay? So if we're talking about a disease state, all right, somebody who is a carrier for the sickle cell trait would be denoted by the half colored in square or circle. Somebody who has sickle cell anemia would have their pedigree completely colored in, okay? That's what tells you affected, all right? There are also going to be some relationships that you're going to see in the pedigree. If you see a female and a male connected together, okay, that indicates the parents in a particular pedigree or tree that we're going to draw, all right? And if you see a male and a female connected by two lines, okay, that's what's known as, oops, I can spell. At least consanguous is a longer word. So a consanguous mating means that those two individuals are going to be related somehow, all right? Whether it be brother, sister, cousins, hopefully not parent and offspring. But if you see the two lines together in there, that would represent a consanguous mating. And that's going to indicate somebody who is related. Okay? So when building a pedigree, all right, you're going to start out obviously following parents, okay? And typically with pedigrees, we'll label that with a Roman numeral 1, okay? When we have a line that comes down from those parents, that is then going to be indicative of their offspring, okay? So this would be our next generation. This would be generation 2, all right? And with pedigrees, birth order is going to be important, okay? So we're going to go from this side to this side in order to define birth order, okay? So our first child born here, if we make this a circle, would be a female. We can make our second child male, okay? Now typically, you know, I'm putting these in. It would follow whatever the birth order is for the particular family that you're following, all right? Then there's going to be another set of nomenclature associated with pedigrees here that we'll go over, okay? And if you see a branch happen, that branch indicates that what you have there are twins that were born, okay? Now in this case, this particular set of branching indicates a set of fraternal twins. And I've drawn these in just to demonstrate that as there was a female and a male child born. You can have fraternal twins that would also be female-female or male-male. What you're looking for is this particular branch to indicate that what you have there is fraternal twins, okay? To indicate identical twins, it's going to be similar, but there's an additional line there, okay? So if you see that additional line, these would be identical twins, all right, in setting up a pedigree, all right? So we've got mom, dad, we've got the first generation. So if we go back to our Punnett squares, this would be the P generation, these would be the F1s, okay? And then I'm going to draw this off to the side here because this is just going to be easiest as far as our pedigree goes. Oh, I made this guy kind of rectangular. There's no extra charge for that. But let's make him square, because boys are square. Okay? This would represent the husband of the first daughter here, all right? And then their children would come off in a branch this way, okay? And if we hypothetically have a boy, a girl, and another girl, okay? This now, I'm kind of drawing it over here. I've been drawing it over here, but just for simplicity's sake, this would be our third generation, okay? This would be equivalent then to an F2, all right? That would be the way we draw the different pedigrees that way, all right? Now, if we're going to follow genetic traits within this pedigree, all right, it might be that mom is a carrier, okay? Dad is a carrier for whatever particular trait we're interested in, and we can go with sickle cell anemia since I talked about that before, okay? Say mom and dad are both carriers for sickle cell anemia, all right? Then you're going to look at the frequency of that being transmitted to the offspring, okay? So maybe we've got a carrier here, somebody who's unaffected, not a carrier, or has the disease. We'll put someone who has a child that has the disease, okay? And then maybe we'll make these two carriers again. Okay? Again, maybe this woman marries a man who is also a carrier for that particular trait. They have an affected individual, a carrier, and someone who's not affected, okay? So a lot of times with pedigrees, what'll go along with this, okay? So we'll use capital A here is going to be normal, little a, sickle cell anemia. So we can fill in what we know about each individual's genotype based on that pedigree. So we know that mom and dad have to both be carriers because they're shaded in, okay? These two would also be carriers, all right? Because this individual is not a carrier or affected, they had to inherit a dominant trait from mom, or I'm sorry, normal trait from mom, normal trait from dad, and in terms of that, the normal trait would be considered the dominant trait, okay? So that would be their genotype. This individual that's affected, I'm going to write this down here, she has to be homozygous recessive because sickle cell anemia is a recessive trait, a recessive disease, so that she would have two lowercase a's. This son, capital A. These two then would be heterozygous, okay? So if you have that information from the pedigree, you can fill in the prospective genotype for the individuals, okay? Oops. Again, this person's affected, so it'd be little a. This person's heterozygote. This person does not have the trait, okay? So you can build that up using a pedigree to track different traits, okay? I use sickle cell anemia as the example. There are other traits in there that you can follow this way that are passed on genetically, okay? Things like cystic fibrosis that we'll talk a little bit about. Cystic fibrosis is also going to be what's known as autosomal recessive, okay? Sickle cell anemia is also going to be autosomal recessive, okay? And that autosomal, I'm going to define that for you now, okay? When we're talking about a trait that's going to be autosomal, it's going to be on chromosomes 1 through 22, okay? Which means they're the chromosomes that all individuals would inherit, all human individuals would inherit, okay? That's what it means to be autosomal. I'll have another video that'll go over sex linkage, okay? So if a particular disease is sex-linked, all right, most often it's going to be the X chromosome that is going to be implicated in something that is sex-linked, although it can also be the Y chromosome, all right? It's just more frequent to have things that are sex-linked on the X chromosome, and things that are sex-linked on the chromosome that we'll talk about are things like hemophilia. Also, color blindness would be an example of a sex-linked trait, and I've got a video that'll go into more detail on that, okay? But really, that's the difference we're talking about. If I give you something and I tell you it's an autosomal trait, it means it's got to be on chromosomes 1 through 22. So it's going to follow normal Mendelian genetics, all right? If I tell you something is a sex-linked trait, inheritance is going to be a little bit different, and we'll talk about those differences in another video. But those are two terms I want you to be aware of, okay, as far as our pedigrees go, all right? So the pedigree that I drew up here would be an example of a trait that is autosomal recessive. Next video I'm going to put up, I'm going to draw out what an autosomal dominant trait will look like, and then I'll also draw out what a sex-linked pedigree would look like. All right. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, please let me know.